These are really great comments. I was telling him it's fantastic to get good comments like this. A lot of times we'll give a talk, and sometimes you feel lucky that the person even read the paper, understood it. But Simone is like right on target, so I love his comments. So let me go through some of the things that he talked about. So the example with like the rubber band and the powers and everything. On the view, so the hylomorphist is going to be like the physicalist insofar as when it comes to the concrete details of things, the hylomorphist is going to farm out or outsource, I don't know how you can say that. A lot of the work to scientists. So if you want to know what it is that makes the human structure different from the structure of a dog or an oak tree, the hylomorphist says, well, don't ask a philosopher, ask a biologist. The biologist will tell you, what it is that distinguishes the human from the dog. Likewise, when it comes to descriptions of powers in general, so you talked about the powers of the elastical, and you could describe them as a function. So the hylomorphist is happy to go with that. If that's our best description of it, if the best description of that power is in terms of a mathematical function, the hylomorphist says, yeah, well, that's the way it is. Likewise, the fragility of window, that you could break it by impact or by torquing it. That's going to be the way that the window interacts with other things that have reciprocal powers. So we'll just farm that out to the empirical disciplines. Rocks. So are rocks structured individuals, or are they just collections of physical materials arranged this way or that? Again, hylomorphists, on their view, it's going to be, well, let's talk to the scientists. Does the rock or does the table do something in addition to the physical materials by themselves? So if there's nothing going on right here in this region of space that can't be described by physics, so if physics, the physics of these particles gives us the complete story about what's going on here, then there is no table. There's no new individual. It's just physical materials that are spatially arranged table-wise. Likewise, your example of gneiss. That's one of my favorite rocks, by the way. Because of the bands. So does the piece of gneiss, is there really a thing, a distinctive individual gneiss here, or is it just minerals that are arranged nicely? So ask the scientists. Isn't that terrible? It's going to depend. We're going to have to talk to the scientists. The geologist will say, oh, no. We can give an exhaustive description of everything that's going on right here just by talking about the minerals. In that case, there is no new individual, the piece of gneiss. It's just the minerals. But if there is something that this can do that's going on in this region of space that the minerals don't do, well, then there is a new individual. Now, in the hylomorphic view, at least the one that I'm defending, you and I are going to be like these things that we're doing things that the physical materials by themselves don't do. Could that be wrong? Yes, it could. If once our best science works out, it could be the case that it's the same way with us as it would be with the gneiss or the table. So, and hylomorphists say what's true is going to be determined by the sciences. So to use Hartree-Field's expression, hylomorphism is like physicalism insofar as it's a high-level empirical hypothesis. So we're making a comment, just like physicalists do, on the way the science is going to work out. And if the science doesn't work out in the way hylomorphists describe, well then theory is false. Just like if it doesn't work out the way physicalists describe, physicalism is false. So we're open to empirical falsification. Let's see here. Okay, so clarifying the metaphysics. So I am not a structure. I'm an individual that has a structure. So we are not structures. We're individuals that have structures. So the basic ontology is a substance attribute ontology. There are substances or individuals that have attributes or properties, and these are just different categories of things. Those properties are tropes. I'm a trope theorist. I like tropes. I think there are reasons to prefer trope theory to a view that posits universals. And when it comes to general types, I think those are just classes of particulars, resemblance classes, as Simone indicated. Just even though my human structure and his human structure are numerically different, they're nevertheless very similar and because of that we can call both of them human structures. But by doing that, that's just a way that we have of conceptualizing numerically different structures in the world. Okay, now philosophy of mind, the big questions. How does the view differ from the identity theory and from functionalism? I talk about this in a lot of detail in the book, and I also defend trope theory in a lot of detail in the book. But it's important because there are some philosophers who look at the hylomorphic view, and they look at essential physical embodiment, and they're like, isn't this just a form of physicalism or materialism? It seems to be the same thing. Even Bernard Williams, who, is a pretty good scholar, once said, hylomorphism just looks like what he called a polite form of materialism. And so I'd spend a lot of time in the book articulating, 9 or 10 different ways that you might think hylomorphism is just a version of physicalism. And I go through in detail and explaining, here's why it's not a form of physicalism. It's similar in spirit to physicalism, so there are no ghostly entities on this view, there are no spooky things, no substance dualistic ghosts. And in that sense, it's a view that a physicalist should feel fairly comfortable with and should see it as a rival, as opposed to a view like substance dualism or idealism, which are just spooky views. So it's not going to be like those. But specifically, why is it not a form of the identity theory? Well, the identity theory, the psychophysical identity theory, is going to say that my thoughts and my feelings are identical to states of the brain. So there is no difference between a brain state and a thought or a feeling. The hylomorphic view says, no, there is a difference because there's more to the thought or the feeling than just the brain state. The brain state has to be coordinated with other things in the right kind of way. And that coordination or that organization, that's something in addition to the brain state. So by analogy, imagine an identity theory that said, I am identical to these physical materials. Hylomorphism will say, no, you're not identical to the materials. You're identical to an individual that is composed of these materials with a structure. Likewise, my throwing a baseball is not identical to the nerves firing and the muscles contracting, because a mad neuroscientist could stick a chip in my brain and make my arm move in this way. In fact, Wilder Penfield, the neurosurgeon, used to do this with his patients before he cut out pieces of their brain. Well, it sounds pretty grisly, but he would do this. He would stimulate sections of cortex, because the way you perform surgery on people who have these conditions that can't be treated by drugs is you remove the part of the brain that's producing seizures. And to figure out where that is, you stimulate sections of the cortex electrically. And sometimes you'll stimulate a section of cortex, and it'll be a functional area of the brain. The person will say, butterfly. And he would ask the patients, why did you say that? And they would say, I didn't say it, you made me say it. Or he'll stimulate a section of the brain and a person's arm would go like this and say, why did you move your arm? As if he's messing with them. Like, why did you move your arm? And they would say, I didn't move my arm, you did. So clearly, the movement of limbs and utterances like that, we don't count them as actions unless they're performed in the right kind of way, unless they're coordinated with a whole lot of other stuff. So there's going to be more to an action like throwing a baseball. There's going to be more to, say, a perception than a state of the brain. So if you look at this, your perceptual state, you are seeing water only if this really is water. If this isn't water, but gin, then you're not looking at water. You're looking at gin. In order to be seeing water, the state of your brain is not enough. You can have the same brain state whether you're looking at water or gin. To have a state of seeing water, the environment has to cooperate. It has to be coordinated with your brain state in the right kind of way. So the perceptual state is this zone that includes not just the states of your brain, but also the states of the environment. This is standard externalist thinking in philosophy of mind of the sort that Tyler Burge and Hilary Putnam defend. So the thoughts, the feelings, the perceptions, they're states that aren't just the states of the brain, they're states of the brain, states of the environment, all together unified in the right kind of way by being structured in the right kind of way. So that's what's going to distinguish it from an identity theory. it's going to be different from functionalism for a different reason. So on this view, emergent properties, the new properties, they are higher level properties, but not higher order properties. I know this is a subtle difference. A higher order property is one that has a specific kind of definition. It's a definition that involves quantifiers. I don't know how you say that in Italian.
Quantificatore.
Okay, so you have a quantifier. So for instance, a functionalist would say, being in pain is being in some internal state that does these things. So there's a quantifier. It doesn't say what kind of internal state, it's just any old internal state that does this. So that gives pain a higher order definition. It's a logical construction. According to hylomorphists, mental states, thoughts and feelings aren't defined in this way because they're not just abstract descriptions, they're first order states in their own right. They're causal powers in their own right. So one way of thinking about a functionalist, say a functionalist who also endorses physicalism. The functionalist says everything that exists is physical. In principle, everything can be described completely by physics. But there are different ways of talking about that physical universe, and we just introduced this new way of talking about the physical universe. Hylomorphists say, it's not just, when we talk about thoughts and feelings, it's not just a new way of talking. There really are new powers that we're talking about. And that's going to be the difference between a functionalist and a hylomorphist. And again, on both of these points, both the identity theory and the and functionalism, I talk about those in the book in much more detail because it's important that we get clear on what distinguishes hylomorphism from these other views. Finally, with regard to zombies, yeah, my view implies it's not possible to have zombies. And when it comes to the Chalmers argument, I spend several sections dealing with his argument because everybody's been so hypnotized by Chalmers to believe that consciousness is a problem. And there are several ways that ways that hylomorphists have of rejecting the possibility of zombies are really no different from the ways that physicalists and identity theorists have. So you can either reject the claim that these kinds of things are conceivable, or you can reject the claim that if it's conceivable, then it's possible.
Yes.
Exactly. And if we use Chalmers' preferred vocabulary, it depends on how you define conceivability, how you define possibility. If we use the definitions that he prefers, hylomorphists end up rejecting the claim that conceivability is sufficient for possibility. So their view ends up saying, we can play with concepts and hence conceive of things that correspond to nothing that's possible. And again, the argument is very detailed, but it's I couldn't. I'm not going to talk about it like a talk like this, right? But it's very detailed, and it's just a matter of saying, but the moves aren't that different from what a physicalist makes because Chalmers is a common enemy.
Yeah,
common enemy, and
yes,
that's right. So that's what I have to say in response to that.
Okay, excellent. Now you're up.
Yeah, okay, maybe we have comments from Francesco and Diana. I think so.
Non so se però ci sono domande, forse è meglio.
Yeah, question from students? Don't be shy.
Potete farlo in italiano e lui traduce.
Yeah.
Okay. So, do you want to come up there now, or
Maybe Francesco first. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I have, as a first point, it's not a question but a general comment about the relationship between philosophy of mind and the mind-body problem and ancient philosophy.
Okay.
Because it is generally known that Aristotle has been read and considered as a sort of possible predecessor for contemporary philosophy of mind. Putnam, of course, and functionalism, but not only that, even other theories. But I would say, and probably more for students than for you, that it is interesting, I think, to remark that this reading of ancient philosophy is now, and I mean last 20 years, much more, much wider and much more frequent, even for other philosophers. I'm thinking of Plato, for example, and for that sort of psychophysiology that he produces in the Timaeus, which I would consider as a sort of clear exposition of an interactionist dualism, but also Epicurus. I'm thinking of the book by Francesco Fronterotta, Epicurus and Philosophy of Mind, and even, which seems to be quite strange, Plotinus, which has been considered as a sort of predecessor of monism or eliminativism, not from the contemporary point of view of physicalism, but as a philosopher who reduces everything to the soul and to the nous, to the mind. So body is reduced to the soul and to the mind, not the mind and the soul to the body. I mean, it's quite interesting to see that in the last 20 years we have many different developments about this possible relationship between philosophy of mind and, above all, the mind-body problem and ancient philosophers. As for your talk,
by the way, on that note, I was just at a conference in Naples, and Riccardo Chiaradonna just gave a discussion of how hylomorphism was received after Aristotle. And for about 5 centuries, like, nobody can understand the view. They tried to say, oh, it's just a sort of materialist view, and others would try to say, oh, it's a substantialist view. And of course, he focuses on Plotinus, and he was talking about Plotinus's view of, like, the concrete physical objects. They're actually not distinctive individuals, but just bundles of qualities. Plotinus doesn't even conceive of them as these individual things. And so it's like this predecessor of, like, an idealist view of, as you said, like a phenomenalist view or something. I just thought that was kind of interesting. But,
and it is very interesting because I think it's quite new. It's quite new.
Yeah. He didn't convince me that I should read Plotinus. But in fact, one of the undergrads was, oh good, we can continue to ignore Plotinus. I don't have to, like, read that stuff.
And the second point, very briefly, is about your talk. I think the first part of your talk, the question of the notion of eidos as disposition or from disposition to structure. I think it is a point I discussed with Anna Marmodoro concerning Plato. You mentioned her name, so I'm thinking of that. In your, if I understand, of course, in your vision, in your presentation, eidos as disposition means that hylomorphism is based on this notion of structure. But I have a problem about structure. I see what you mean about that, but do you have, or do you suppose that you should have a principle for that structure? I mean, for Aristotle, eidos is disposition, but it is also a principle of disposition. So there is structure, but there is also the metaphysical dimension for this structure, the cause of this structure. In this case, hylomorphism for Aristotle is something quite different. It is a morphe, which is not only the disposition of a certain eule, but it is also the cause and the principle of the disposition of that eule. So, don't you need, for that, a metaphysical principle, which is something more than structure or power? You see what I mean?
Let me see if I can figure it out. So I think so there are a couple things. One was principle, another was cause, and another was the way you were using the term structure. So I think that the way you're using the term structure is different from the way that I'm using the term structure. My sense is that when you're talking about a structure, you're talking about a spatial arrangement of things.
Yeah.
That's not what I mean by a structure. Now, some contemporary hylomorphists use the word structure in exactly the way you're talking about, spatial arrangement. David Oderberg is an example. So Oderberg has this paper, which is something like, is form structure? And his answer is no, it's not. And he says the reason is that structure is just spatial arrangement, but form, in the hylomorphic sense, is more than spatial arrangement. I think two things to say. First of all, no contemporary hylomorphist disagrees with that claim. Second, no contemporary hylomorphist thinks that structure is just spatial arrangement. Every contemporary hylomorphist I know of, including the formalistic ones like Kip Fine and Mark Johnston, think that structure is much more elaborate and does many more things than simply spatial arrangement does. Okay, and this gets to the other points, the cause and the principle thing. So, I mean, if you look at the way that I described it in terms of structure, it's an irreducible ontological principle. What does that mean? What does the, here this is like supposed to be a rough translation of arche. But when I talk to people in philosophy of mind and contemporary metaphysicians, they always wonder, like, what do you mean by principle? Like, hylomorphists always use that word, what do they mean by principle? And it's really just a placeholder for the thing that does these jobs. So that thing that's doing these jobs, if you think about it, it's responsible for those materials being unified into one. Now, if you take Aristotle seriously and take the notion of explanation to map onto the notion of cause, and he says this, and Aitia answers the question diati, why or on account of what.
Yeah.
And so for something to play a causal role is for it to answer certain kinds of questions. Why is it that the contents of the bag include one human before the squashing and none afterward? Because of the structure. Why is it that the contents can think and feel and act before but not after? Because of the structure. Structure is obviously doing causal work here in the sense that it's explaining why something is what it is and why it can do what it does. If somebody wants cause in some different sense, I would just want to know what the notion of cause, like what questions that notion of cause is trying to answer. Because if it doesn't answer any questions, I don't think there is such a thing as a cause that doesn't answer questions. What's the notion of cause doing for you besides answering questions? So the notion of structure, in my sense, is not mere spatial relations. It's a notion of something that explains, so it's an arche in that sense. And the kind of explanatory work that it does is answering questions about what there is and what it does. So that's as robust a notion of causation as I think you can get out of anything. Does that?
Yeah, I see quite well that my disagreement is about the notion of cause, because I absolutely do not believe that for Aristotle cause is just the answer, the explanatory answer to the question why, as Michael Frede defended in a famous, maybe too much famous paper in the 80s. I think that for Aristotle there is an important role and an important place for generative or properly efficient cause for the generation of things, so that it is not only a question of explanation, so that if you have a structure, you have to not only to explain how it works, but where it comes from. So the principle in this case is something which is stronger to me.
Okay.
You see what I mean? I think that this is
Sure.
the difference.
Well, I think if we were to think about it in those terms, then the worry that I would have with it is that if that is Aristotle's view, my worry is just that Aristotle's just wrong.
I
Like, think about science, right?
Yeah.
So because if we were to talk about, if we were to look at Simone's structure and say, what is it that's responsible for moving the different particles around here and there? If you wanted to have something that played that causal role, we would have to find like some spooky ghost in here that's doing the pushing.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's what a hylomorphic structure is, because I think that he does have one of those. It's what gets destroyed with the squashing. But I don't think you find a spooky ghost thing when you examine it. All you find is the bits.
Yeah.
So the structure is there, it's real, but you don't find anything in addition to the bits moving around when you study it using physics or chemistry. So that means structure is not this extra ghostly thing that plays that role. I think that's the way I want to go. And I'm sorry to have to part company. If that is Aristotle's view, I don't think it is. But
my reading of Aristotle.
That's right.
My reading.
And I was going to say, so if that is Aristotle's view,
Yeah.
I'm not on board with Aristotle, and so much the worse for Aristotle, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Questions?
Okay, yes, I have two questions. So you claim that structures exist and that they are basic ontological principles. And so also that hylomorphism does not have to reply to the question how these structures are generated by lower level stuff. And this, so far, is more or less the same as Aristotle says.
Oh.
So form is not generated by matter, but there is a difference between your position and Aristotle's regarding this topic, because Aristotle believes something that you cannot longer believe, that is that forms are eternal.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have to reply to the question how the first structure came about, because forms of living things have always been there. So, but if you are an ontological naturalist, and so if you believe that the theory, the Darwinian theory of evolution by selection is true, you cannot believe that forms are eternal. So my question is, I see that you don't want to reply to the question how the structure is continuously produced by lower level material, and I think it's quite reasonable, because I mean, when the structures are there, then you can explain, for instance, why this child has a certain structure by making reference to the structure of the parents and their reproductive activities. But what about the first occurrence of a structure? So you claimed it is a legitimate empirical endeavor to attempt to discover how the first living things emerge. That is, how the first living structures came to form various prebiotic materials. So what do you mean by empirical endeavor? Do you mean that this is something that doesn't concern your hylomorphic view? So
Yeah, that's one of these things where I give it to the scientists. So if you want to know how it is that that the first living things came to be, whether it was RNA world or whether it was the movement of the crystals on the clay, whatever, there are a range of hypotheses for how the first living things came to be. You don't ask a philosopher. Philosophers don't study that stuff. They're not looking at the fossil record. They're not doing the chemistry. They're not performing like the Miller experiment with the test tubes and stuff like that. They're not the ones who do that. Biologists do. And that specific branch of biology that deals with origins of life. So if you want to know what conditions ultimately led to something having powers different from just the materials themselves, you have to ask a scientist.
okay, true, but I agree with this, but the point is that perhaps if you endorse the Darwinian theory of evolution, and you are also endorse the hylomorphic view, even if you don't have to explain exactly what happened, then if you think that structure exists, then you have to explain metaphysically how the structure wasn't there at time 0, but is there at time 1. So it seems that the theory of evolution forces you to explain the appearance of structure from the lower level stuff that the structure is a structure of, even if you don't have to explain from a chemical point of view what exactly happened. So if you are committed to an ontological claim that the structure exists, and you are also committed to ontological naturalism, and so you have to endorse the theory of evolution by selection as opposed to other theories of evolution, like those that claim that species were always there somewhere and they just appeared at different times in their history. So if you don't agree with these other theories of evolution, but with the Darwinian one, then perhaps your ontological claim have to do something with the appearance of structure at a certain point in history.
Okay, so maybe this is the way I think about it. Instead of thinking about evolution by natural selection, like operating over time, let's consider an imaginary example that will help illustrate the way that a hylomorphist of my sort will try to approach this. So suppose that lightning strikes a swamp, and that energy mobilizes all the pieces of swamp sludge, so that next thing you know, we get Simone. That we just find this out, that in fact he did not have a human mother or anything like this. He was just materials that got mobilized by swamp sludge, by lightning striking swamp sludge. So at this time, right now, we can say, well, look, these things are structured human-wise. All the particles are doing that human dance right here. The question of how that structure came to be in place is the question of what conditions prior to Simone's existence led to those particles engaging in that dance. So we've got all these little particles, and they start doing this dance where they just sort of start whatever human metabolism looks like if you think about particles. And the question is, well, what started this? Well, in this case, the lightning did something, right? We have the demiurge or whatever, ends up getting these particles to do this thing, and lo and behold, it's a self-maintaining process. Once they start interacting in those ways, they just keep on going. And there are self-replicating molecules, there are self-maintaining chemical processes, and the people who work on origins of life, they think, yeah, we have these self-maintaining processes. If you get enough of those going on in the right conditions, you get a living thing. You get the kinds of things that are living. What are the details? Well, that's something that we have to talk to them about. So the account is going to be a chemical account, because at that point, there isn't yet a structured individual. We're talking about the physical and chemical conditions that exist before the structured individual comes into existence, but that are responsible for generating that structured individual. And so that is, I think, you farm that out to the biologists and the chemists. What I'm concerned to avoid is when this dance is going on, the question of, well, what's doing the pushing? Or how do these things squirt out? Like, how do these particles here squirt out or produce Simone's life? The hylomorphists will say, well, they don't. The life isn't a byproduct. Life isn't some gooey stuff that's a byproduct of the particles doing their thing. It's not squirted out by the particles engaged in this dance. It is the dance. It is that pattern of interactions. That's what the life is. And that's different from the way emergentists think about it. Emergentists say, no, it's this extra stuff that gets squirted out by the particles doing the dance. That's the question that I think is not legitimate. But the question of what started the dance going, what started the particles interacting these ways, that I think is a legitimate scientific endeavor. I don't think the philosophers are very much help with that. Does that clarify?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. Just another brief question. You claim that hylomorphic structures are different from other kinds of structure because they have a reflexive kind of activity. They're powers that differ from other powers because they are their own disposition partners. Okay, so my question is, do you think that this kind of definition or distinguishing trait of hylomorphic structure, by which you mean paradigmatically organism, I think?
Organisms are individuals with structures, yes.
Okay. So, is this reflexivity sufficient, you think, to distinguish hylomorphic structures from all other structures? I mean, there may be other structures which we don't generally consider to be living, so things that can be described in a reflexive way. And so I was wondering whether this notion of reflexivity is enough to distinguish hylomorphic structure from other structures that you generally don't want to be hylomorphic structure. And another question on this point is, so is reflexivity really the distinguishing trait of all hylomorphic structure? I can see easily why reflexivity is important if I think about the metabolic functioning and self-reproductive activity of an organism, but it's less clear to me how perception, feeling, or thought can be considered as a reflexive activity. So,
Okay, good. So when it comes to calling it a reciprocal power, self-manifesting power, that's a better way to think about it, self-manifesting power. So when it comes to salt and water, okay, so if I put oil in water, the oil doesn't dissolve.
Yeah.
Why not? Because it doesn't have the right kind of power. If I want something to dissolve in water, it has to have the right kind of power, so that the power of water and the power of that thing can work together. Now there are some things, like some compounds, like ammonium triiodide, which you put them there, they get exposed to air and they explode. And it's like, well, there was nothing there that had to work together with the ammonium triiodide to get the explosion. So that starts to look like a power that doesn't need a partner. But the way you respond is to say, well, clearly there are ways in which you could have isolated the ammonium triiodide. Or another example, radioactive decay. So the uranium atom just loses a beta particle, all on its own. And it looks like, well, that looks like an occurrence that didn't need a partner. And I think the thing for somebody who believes in power is to say in response is, well, even in those cases, the environment didn't have something that prevented the beta particle, that inhibited the beta particle from going out, or that inhibited the ammonium triiodide from exploding. So at the very least, the environment that doesn't have inhibiting factors is a disposition partner. Now, when it comes to my structure, so I'm structuring these materials, what partner do I need to do this? You could say, well, I need to have the right kinds of materials. I can't structure a brick, hand-wise. I need the right kinds of biological materials to do that. To structure materials hand-wise. So you could call that the partner of a structure. Or you could just say, well, a structure doesn't really, it's not the kind of thing that needs a partner in that sense, in the way that the water and the salt have to be partners. It's just a power that is just constantly doing its own thing wherever it is. So it has to do with distinguishing a structure from other kinds of powers. So think about other kinds of powers, like the salt, the power of the salt to dissolve. It doesn't have to dissolve. It could just sit there forever. You could have particles of salt just in space forever. Whereas I want to say, like, once I stop manifesting this power, it's not like I can put that power on hold, like, okay, I'm going to stop structuring these materials human-wise. Once I do that, I'm gone, right? I can say, okay, I'm going to put a bullet in my head. That'll stop me from structuring the materials human-wise. It's not like I can come back and say, okay, do over. It's done, right? The structure's gone. And that's something that sets apart, there's that one, so my structure isn't a power that can exist unmanifested. It's always manifesting itself so long as it exists. And so something has to account for why that power is different from the other powers. And so structures, what makes them different is that there are no takebacks. So that's what I try to capture with with the reflexive power. They're self-manifestors or autonomous manifestors. They don't need the partners in the way that the salt and the water do. So that's all that's trying to capture. It's just a way of trying to capture that idea. And the same thing would be for like, my throwing a baseball. So long as I'm engaged in that activity, that organization is there. If you were to take away the organization, that activity stops. I can't sort of suspend the activity, in midair the way you can like on the television where you pause it and, the image freezes. In real life, the real activity can't freeze like that. You stop the activity by stopping that coordination. So it's the same kind of thing with the organism. And that's all that language of reflexive power is meant to capture, that there's a difference between a structure and that kind of a power, and the power that you have with the salt and the water, which need each other. Does that clarify
Yeah,
that?
got it.
Okay.
Simone, yes.
This reply, I thank Diana for bringing this out. I'm wondering whether it fits with your externalistic view about me. Because you said that hylomorphism distinguishes itself from identity theory because narrow content doesn't go and we need wide content because...
Oh, that's not the full, I mean, because you can believe in wide content and be an identity.
Yeah, no, yeah, but you mentioned this as an important feature of your not believing that hylomorphism is...
Oh, no.
I didn't get it right?
It is an implication, externalism is an
Yeah.
implication of the hylomorphic view, but I would never claim that, that externalism by itself provides an argument against the identity theory.
Okay, no, but I'm more concerned about externalism being an implication for the hylomorphism
Okay.
with the view that we are self-reflexive kind of agents or structures.
Or that a structure
Yes.
doesn't need something else to.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because if with respect to mental properties, externalism is what makes the content of our mental states the content they are, then it seems that in order for us to have a mental activity, we need the external world, because the content of our mental states is based
Yeah,
on the relation to the external world. So I wonder how can we be self-reflexive in this sense? I mean, it is not that I refer to my perceived view of the water. You want to say that I refer to this, right?
Right.
You want to be as serious externally like that, okay? So it seems that in order for me to have a mental state about water, I need water. Not I need an image of a water in my mind. That would be just another, there would be narrow content, that would be. So I wonder
okay,
how
good,
can you...
yeah. Good, so perception, so the account of perception, I'm actually working on a book on hylomorphic view of perception right now.
Okay.
So the way the perception works within the general framework that we're talking is that your power to perceive and the water's power to be perceived, those are reciprocal disposition partners. So you can manifest your power to perceive. It's like the water and the salt. For the water to dissolve and for something to be dissolved by the water, they have to have powers that fit together. Likewise, for you to see something and for something to be seen, you have to have powers that can fit together.
Yeah.
So this has to be able to reflect light. You have to be able to receive, light, and so you have reciprocal power. So the power to perceive is going to fall within the standard reciprocal model of powers.
Okay, so but then I'm not completely exhausted by this self-reflexive
No,
activity.
Not at all.
Because because I didn't concentrate myself on this point, but I got you were suggesting that we are special in being, some say, autonomous because we are self-reflexive on this kind of the structure is yeah, but it seems that the structure
Here it is, the structure, what distinguishes, so you have all the powers,
Right.
which are properties. We're not properties, we're individuals.
Yeah, okay.
So if I want to distinguish some powers from other powers, some of them need partners, structures don't, something like that.
Yeah, but it seems that if structure doesn't need partners, and if it's part of my structure to be able to perceive, then it's part of the structure to need partners, right?
And it's not part of your structure, it's not part of your structure to be able to perceive. It's your power to perceive.
Okay, but there is something in my structure which is over and above my powers. You don't want to have ghostly stuff, right?
That's right. There's just you, no ghostly things, just
Okay,
you.
so my structure is bundle or bunch or
No,
organizing group of my powers. That is
not
that.
exactly, no. Again, structure is a basic positive of the theory. So it's easiest to sort of shift into an empirical mode. We say, well, look, what is it that makes you the kind of thing you are? And you're like, well, there's this stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
But then we say, well, there's more than just the stuff, because when we squash you, you're not there anymore.
Yeah.
So we say, okay, you're right, it's the stuff, but there's also that way that the stuff is organized.
Right.
And if you say, well, what is that? We say, well, we can't say it's a category thing, we just say we can describe it. We can talk to the biologist, and the biologist will describe what it is, and we'll talk about glycolysis and Krebs cycle and all these things.
Yeah. Exactly.
And there's not going to be any spooky things that the biologist talks about. But all those descriptions of those metabolic processes, that's going to be a description of the structure that makes these materials, those materials with that structure, that's what makes you what you are.
Yeah, but
And because of that, you'll also have other powers.
yeah,
the
but
power to see it.
yeah, but it seems that the structure that I enjoy essentially depends on certain kind of interaction with the world,
Yeah.
right? I mean, oxygenation. So it seems that you cannot consider my structure in isolation from with respect to the powers that it exercises. Right?
True.
So in a way, you cannot distinguish it from the number of powers which are essential to it in order for it to continue to be the unity that you want. It is essential for me to continue breathing and feeding and whatever. So it seems that I cannot came alone. My structure cannot came alone. It comes with a bunch of things,
Right.
isn't it?
Yeah,
So
good,
it's
good,
a-
good. This is why when I replied to Diana's question, I was saying, well, in one sense you could say, if you were to say, well, isn't your structure just like all the other powers? Like, frankly, I would like that because then I don't have to introduce this new way, because I was just, all the powers are the same. And one way of doing that is to say, well, my structure does have partners. It has to partner with the right kinds of material. It couldn't be partnered with a
Yeah.
brick.
Yeah.
It has to be partnered with the right kinds of things. And that's one way of understanding what it's partnered with. It's the material conditions, the material substrate has to be right in order for you to be able to structure the materials. If you were to eat brick,
Yeah.
it wouldn't become part of your body tissue. It has to be the right material. So that's another way of thinking about how you can get structure to fit into the model towers in general.
Yeah.
And
No, I was
so-
thinking, just put me, my structure, the structure I am, on Mars, and then open the door. Welcome Mars, immediately, because I need a bunch of stuff coming with me in order for me to be the kind of unity we are considering, right? And so I can imagine that there can be, different gravity. Welcome here, immediately gone, etc.
Right.
So the number of things that I need to be the kind of unity I am, it's quite a big number, I
Right.
guess.
Yeah, you need lots of helpers. Yeah.
Exactly. And it seems that also with respect to the mind, I mean, if you want to have also the externalist view of the mind, you need also metaphysical helpers.
Yeah.
Because you want that I really perceive things out there, I'm not just perceiving my own imagination and the like, and I'm not subject to the evil genius or whatever,
Yep.
or brain of that,
Yep.
mentioning Hillary Clinton, etc. So I'm suggesting that the kind of autonomy that I thought you were discussing first is not that easy to obtain, because basically we are working with our environmental niche. So it seems that we are working.
Yep.
It's a big group here coming. And this.
No, you know what? I mean, the more I think through your question, Diana's, the more I think that it's a more helpful way of characterizing structure to just to describe it as that its reciprocal disposition partner or partners have to do with the materials, and to leave aside this characterization as self-reflexive manifestor. That, well, it's a manifestor that needs these helpers, otherwise you don't get it. That might be a much more helpful way of thinking about
Yeah.
what separates structures. Its reciprocal disposition partners are the materials that compose something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it would be interesting, for instance, think about social properties. There are certain kind of interactions I engage in, for instance speaking, just if there is another kind of structure that for
Right.
listening, because otherwise, I mean, yeah, surely, obviously, as all philosophers, I speak alone in the room, but that's a matter of pathology. But speaking of physiology, we usually speak to other people, so it seems that we engage or we learn from each other, right? And
That's
so
right, we're reciprocal.
the very
disposition
notion of
partners.
learning seems to be a reciprocal partner disposition, because something has to teach, something has to learn, somebody has to teach, somebody has to learn. So,
Right.
so it always has to do with the way in which the essential, I would say, social nature of us has to be described and faced, and that we have to consider also these kind of partners. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, I think that, I'll have to think through the implications more carefully, but it would be really nice if I didn't have to make structures really special powers as opposed to
Yeah.
just powers of some other sort. And this would enable me to do that. I could just have one overall account of powers. The structures are just powers of that sort. Their reciprocal partners are just the materials that compose the individual of the event. That would be, yeah, that'd be good. That'd be good. Because I mean, we're philosophers. We're about elegance. The more work you can do with the fewer principles, the better. So yeah, if I have to introduce one less primitive, that's great. That's good. That's good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Questions? Or maybe
For lunch?
okay, a brief lunch together, yes. So thank you,
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you
Bill
so much
and
for having me.
Simone.